You mentioned verifying these embodied carbon reductions in these products, and we obviously always push third-party certification and transparency. So how do these embodied carbon reductions in products actually get verified and certified?
So what would happen would be if there's going to be a process like everything. So basically, to have that verification done, it would be important for whoever is making the claim. Let's say it's a building product company and they're talking about the fact that they've reduced the carbon footprint of the products. They would have had to done a life cycle assessment of the first generation of the product. So they looked at it and they understood where the impacts were. Like I said, we talked a lot about the raw materials and the manufacturing and the transportation and that kind of thing. And they would look at that from their perspective and see what's going on in terms of where are the impacts, what are the hot spots? Is it certain raw materials? Is it the energy we're using in our plant? Different things like that. They would then go into their sustainable product innovation process and use that information. And then they would make changes to the product, or they would make changes in their manufacturing plant. And then they would run a second life cycle assessment to show we actually made these changes and here was the effect. Mm-hmm. So you could physically see from the LCA, you would be able to compare generation 1 to generation 2, and you would see where those impacts got reduced. If you changed out some raw materials or used less raw materials, you would see the carbon footprint come down. If you made your manufacturing facility more energy efficient, you would see the carbon footprint of the product come down, because you're always looking at energy use per product produced. Okay. So that's how they would have the background to be verified. And then what would happen is the third party verification company would get both of those LCAs. They would take a deep dive. They would make sure that it was done to acceptable standards like ISO 14040 and 44. They would then verify that they were done in a similar manner. So you can compare apples to apples, right? So you'd be looking at the software used, you'd be looking at the data sets that were used and different things like that from the life cycle assessment. And then the most important thing here to state would be, if you're getting verified or certified, you would have to have evidence that you actually really did something, right? Because you can't just run an LCA and then run it again and suddenly the product's better. And you're saying, well, why did this happen? And an example of that could be the fact that the electricity grid gets a little cleaner, right? Because over time, we're seeing more renewable energy being used. So the electrons that are coming into the buildings from the grid are actually getting cleaner because there's more coming in from renewables like solar and wind and less from coal-fired, right? Because the grid mix is changing. You can't just basically claim that you reduce the embodied carbon by that. So we'd be looking for evidence like the raw material changes, that they used less raw materials or a different raw material that had a lower carbon footprint, or they added recycled content in that greatly reduced the carbon footprint, or they physically made changes in the factory. Like perhaps they were able to collect waste heat from one process to another and reduce the amount of natural gas in a drying process, or they figured out a way to get more efficient motors or do energy conservation measures that really reduced that energy use in producing the product. So those would be the important things to be verified, and those would have to be checked, and there would have to be evidence and documentation of them in order for this to be a verified or certified claim.
Absolutely. And for Green Circle certified, this process is called our Life Cycle Assessment Optimized certification. So if you go through that, you would get that mark and be able to use it to describe the embodied carbon reductions you have in your products. So,
yeah, and we actually do have quite a few products that have been certified to this already. And I will also point out that this process that I just explained has gone through a review in coordination with, like the United States Green Building Council on the way that things are evaluated and documented to verify this. And there are quite a few products. It's exciting when you start to see some of the things that have been happening, especially when the company uses the LCA and the sustainable product innovation process. And we're seeing reductions as high from anywhere from, 2% carbon footprint reduction all the way up to like 35, 38% just by really focusing in on this. And imagine the power of that, because a company, they can obviously save energy in their building, but if they're making 1 million of these products a year or 2 million of these products a year, and you reduce that carbon footprint, it's like the multiplier effect. It's a huge, huge benefit. And the more companies that do this, the better off we're going to be, because we're looking at everything across the board, and we're all doing that. Also drives a circular economy. We did a podcast on circularity. There's so many great things about doing this.
Absolutely. And Green Circle Certified, as we have talked about in previous podcasts, has been included in Amazon's Climate Pledge Friendly program. And our Life Cycle Assessment Optimized certification is one of the certifications that have qualified to be included in that program. So we're really proud of it. And it's, like Todd said, it's really making a huge difference.
It is. I'm excited about this. I know when we launched the LCA Optimized certification back in 2010 or 2011, we were way ahead of our time, and now it's actually coming back around, and people are really seeing the value of it. So I definitely think this is a great solution for the planet, and it gives me a lot of optimism and hope that as more and more companies do this, it's going to really get that multiplier effect that we need.